The trio of haughty motorcyclists in rural Virginia saw two women by themselves at a petrol station off the highway and assumed they had discovered easy prey. Unfortunately, the night of intimidation was going to turn out to be their worst decision ever. That fateful evening, what started as a regular gas station stop ended up changing the lives of everyone involved and leading to the dismantling of a dangerous criminal organization. Put your current location in the comments section so we know where you are watching today before we get into the story. Also, hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed this tale. You will be treated to a whole new, exclusive tale tomorrow. On a peaceful stretch of Route 11, just outside Roanoke, Kate Foster steered her silver Toyota Camry into Wheeler's Gas and Go, as the sky was illuminated by the amber glow of dusk. Softly buzzing overhead, the little station's fluorescent lights cast pools of harsh light in the darkening gloom. In the passenger seat, her longtime colleague and friend, Detective Sarah Thompson, was sipping the last of her coffee from their previous rest stop. Kate suggested that we stop here to fill up because the fuel gauge was dangerously near to empty. I don't want to take the chance of running out of gas on these rural roads because it's another 1.5 hours to Richmond. They had a long journey from the FBI's Advanced Tactical Training Seminar in Tennessee, so Sarah stretched her arms and nodded in agreement. After 4 days of training, the two women were exhausted but more confident in their newfound defensive skills. Kate, a 35-year-old detective, has spent the last 6 years investigating financial crimes and incidents of abuse against the elderly in Richmond's Special Victims Unit. 2 years her junior, Sarah was a member of the Organized Crime Division, where she followed illicit businesses from one state to another. They both sported laid-back travel attire. Dressed in burgundy sweater and dark jeans is Kate. Sarah wore a gray Richmond Police Department hoodie with black yoga leggings. Because it was second nature to them after years of duty, they kept their badges and service weapons hidden but within easy reach. Sarah went outside to dispose of their coffee cups and get some munchies from the little convenience store as Kate started pumping gas. The night was quiet, disturbed only by the soft hum of the petrol pump and the infrequent rumble of the highway. Sarah could see a middle-aged woman working the register through the store's windows. She had her silver hair tied back in a tidy bun and was identified as "Hello, Margaret." The quiet was broken by the faraway sound of motorbikes. Observing the arrival of 3 massive bikes at the station, Kate lifted her gaze from the pump, her trained eyes capturing the shimmer of metal and chrome. She had red flags raised about them the moment she laid eyes on them. Perhaps it was their very forceful movement through the parking lot or the fact that their license plates appeared to be purposefully masked, rendering them unreadable in the diminishing light. The motorcyclists halted their bikes close to the store's door, the sound of their motors piercing the stillness of the evening before fading away. Kate watched them intently as she pretended to pay attention to the gas pump. The trio of burly men wore weathered leather jackets adorned with emblems she couldn't place as belonging to any known motorcycle gang. The commander was over 6 feet tall and easily identifiable by his salt and pepper beard and enormous, tattooed arms. Not much smaller than him were his pals. A man with a shaved head and brass knuckles protruding from his belt loop stood out, while the other bore a scar that stretched from his left eye to his chin and was adorned with a red bandana. As soon as the motorcyclist stepped foot in the store, Sarah could feel the energy shift. As Margaret snugged herself into her cardigan, her warm grin faded and a protective look took its place. Seizing the opportunity to observe the elderly cashier, the bikers, and the individual's threatened body language, Sarah discreetly positioned herself near the coffee station, ensuring a clear path to the exit. Kate changed the nozzle and finished pumping gas, but she never got back in her car. After years of defending the most defenseless members of society, her gut told her something was wrong. As was customary whenever she sensed something was off, she discreetly got out her phone and sent a short text to dispatch, providing their location and a brief status report. Even though it was a peaceful evening, she could feel as she hit send that it was about to turn into anything from ordinary. A pair of bikers, one with a bandana and the other with brass knuckles, strutted confidently into the store, their heavy boots reverberating on the linoleum floor. They strode through the aisles, shouting and laughing so loudly that Margaret seemed to gag. Through the glass, Sarah caught Kate's gaze. The two were communicating silently, drawing on their years of working together and the common ground they had both traversed. Regardless of the clear no smoking notice that was posted at the petrol pumps, the leader persisted in standing outside and lit a cigarette. He spotted Kate waiting by her car and drew slowly, predatorily, making her feel sick to her stomach. Rebecca didn't bat an eye or turn her head. Throughout her career, she had investigated crimes perpetrated against the most defenseless elements of society, and she had dealt with considerably worse. Her demeanor exuded the calm assurance that comes from having faced society's darkest corners for so long, even though she looked like any other lady in casual attire. Margaret, attempting to avoid making eye contact with the motorcyclists, pretended to sort merchandise behind the counter while her hands quivered ever so slightly. Sarah remained positioned at the coffee station, nonchalantly incorporating cream into a cup that she had no plans to consume. Her untucked sweater masked her pistol, and her right hand remained close to it. She had learned to anticipate problems in her years of working in organized crime, and these individuals were giving her the wrong signs. Sarah could now make out their cars better through the store's windows. The bikes were high-end versions, but someone had made intentional changes to them, such scratching out the vents, changing the exhaust systems, and adding what looked like secret compartments to the saddlebags. Keeping her calm stance, her trained eye effortlessly took note of these subtleties and filed them away. "Excuse me, lovely thing." A nasty edge lurked beneath the faux friendliness of Brass Knuckles' voice as he beckoned to Margaret. "Step out from behind the counter, would you? You could be shown a truly enjoyable time by us." The sound reverberated off the fluorescent-lit walls of the store while his bandana-wearing partner laughed. In response, Margaret stood up taller, her voice betraying her years of expertise dealing with challenging customers. "Sir," she said, politely requesting that the customers complete their purchases and proceed. "Only 20 more minutes until we close." Sarah could see the woman's trembling hands gripping the edge of the counter, despite her forceful tone. Outside, the leader drew a long suck from his cigarette before carelessly flicking it near the gas pumps. As they drew nearer to Kate's vehicle, she detected a combination of leather, musty smoke, and an even stronger scent on his breath. Most likely whiskey. Upon observing his shaky steps and slightly garbled speech, her training came into play. It was always riskier to ride among inebriated motorcyclists. The leader remarked, "Nice car you got here," as he ran his calloused palm over the Toyota hood belonging to Kate. "You are too beautiful to be riding shotgun with me." Smoke blackened his teeth as he smiled. "Name's Serpent. Would you like to go on a ride with me on a genuine machine?" As she searched for weapons, Kate kept her cool and her expression neutral. Something strange bulging under his vest and a knife handle sticking out of his boot caught her attention. Following the drills they had done in their recent tactical lecture, her thoughts raced through a variety of possible outcomes and ways out. Underneath, Margaret was compelled to retreat as Brass Knuckles inched closer to the counter. "Just 20 minutes. And he scowled. "We have plenty of time to become acquainted." Sarah saw his knuckles whiten as he clenched the edge of the counter, and his body language grew increasingly hostile. The old cashier spoke again, her voice quivering ever so slightly. "If it causes any issue, please don't. Any second now, my husband will be here to pick me up." Sarah was aware it was false. Margaret worked alone until midnight, according to her employee schedule that was displayed behind the counter, which she had seen. A woman with 2 little children and an old man with a cane were among the other customers who sensed the increasing danger and silently made their way to the exit, increasing the anxiety in the store. As they departed, the bell rang, and inside were the only occupants, the motorcyclists, Margaret and Sarah. Sarah observed Kate standing by her car, seemingly engrossed in an unwelcome chat with Viper, through the window. A tiny tattoo on his neck, partly obscured by his collar, was something else that Sarah observed as Brass Knuckles leaned further over the counter toward Margaret. A emblem she knew from her recent FBI briefings, one linked to an infamous gang that preyed on unsuspecting East Coast businesses, was visible. It wasn't like this was happening at random. These guys had probably been hanging about the store, looking for an opportunity to pounce. Sarah sensed they had to take swift action because the situation was quickly getting out of hand. Outside, she noticed Kate take a protective posture that would go unnoticed by anybody without training. As they readied themselves for the next move, thoughts of their recent tactical training raced through their heads. It remained to be seen which motorcyclist would err first and how severely they would come to regret it. The tranquil evening was utterly disrupted when, out of nowhere, the man with the huge fist sprang across the counter and seized Margaret's delicate wrist. A terrified gasp from the old woman as she struggled to free herself from his clutches. Her voice quivered with anguish as she pleaded, "Leave me." Brass knuckles sneered and clamped down harder on Grandma, telling her to stop trying so hard. "We simply wanted to express our gratitude for the outstanding customer service you have provided." As he stepped to block the aisle leading from the counter to the exit, his bandana-wearing friend let out a sinister laugh. Sarah required no further evidence of that. She advanced with the confidence that comes with years of police training, her voice slicing through the tension like a sword. "Stop touching her right this second." She had an unmistakable air of dominance despite her composed command. Her assistance temporarily astonished the two motorcyclists, who turned to stare at her. Margaret felt a tiny loosening in his grip on her wrist, but he remained steadfast. "Listen, darling, this is between us and the old lady," Bandana said menacingly as he stepped menacingly toward Sarah. Outside, Viper turned away from Kate as he heard the noise and peered into the storefront windows. For Kate, it was the perfect introduction. Quickly, she drew away from her vehicle and positioned herself to observe the store entry as well as Viper's escalating agitation. Sarah said, "I won't say it again." Her hand was now openly resting near her concealed weapon. She told her to go back from the counter. Sarah kept her gaze fixed on her brass knuckles the whole time, but she was also aware of where the bandana was in her peripheral vision. Using the pause as an opportunity, Margaret freed her wrist and hurriedly retreated via the employee entrance located behind the counter. As she glanced at Sarah, a wave of comfort washed over her pale face. Sarah, the customer who had come to her defense, seemed different. The bell rang wildly above the door as Viper slithered through the store's entrance. Keeping close to the wall, Kate trailed after him as he entered. There were already 3 motorcyclists and 2 females inside the tiny store, and now it felt even smaller. The hum of the fluorescent lights above created harsh shadows that accentuated the seriousness of everyone's faces. "These women are a nuisance." With his speech clearly garbled, Viper inquired of his buddies as he continued to hold his hand close to his vest, where the suspicious bulge was now plainly apparent. In this little room, the liquor on his breath lingered more. The person wearing the sweatshirt considers herself a hero. As Bandana drew nearer to Sarah, he grinned. With their attention squarely on her, the 3 motorcyclists formed a loose semicircle that, to the average person, would have been frightening. Despite her racing heart, Sarah remained steadfast, thanks to her training. Kate was already making her way to the entrance, clearly anticipating something big was about to happen. Then they noticed the familiar blare of distant police sirens. From behind the counter, Margaret must have set off the silent alarm. A look of fury crossed Viper's face. Were the police contacted? He advanced aggressively toward Sarah while his hand returned to his vest, letting out a low growl. But Sarah and Kate moved before he could get to whatever was concealed there. "Officers, remain still." With badges appearing in their left hands and their right hands moving to their weapons, the 2 women simultaneously signaled their arrival. Realization finally dawned on the bikers, and they paused, their expressions revealing horror and bewilderment. "On your knees, hands where we can see them," Kate commanded, her voice carrying the authority of her years on the force. Viper's face turned red with rage as he realized they'd been dealing with police officers the whole time. Bandana made a desperate move, trying to rush toward the door, but Kate was ready. She stepped into his path, her stance solid from years of training. "Bad choice," she calmly stated. As local patrol cars screeched into the gas station parking lot, their blue and red lights flashing through the store windows, the sirens intensified. "On your knees, now." As Margaret watched her harassers encircled by police officers through the employee door window, she was taken aback by how swiftly the situation had changed. The scene was illuminated like a carnival gone bad as additional patrol cars pulled up outside. Because the motorcyclists picked the wrong folks to harass at a tiny petrol station in rural Virginia, their night took a drastically different turn than they had anticipated. However, Sarah and Kate still had a long night ahead of them. There was a feeling that this was only the start of a much larger case. "You can bet these badges are not real." As he knelt on the chilly linoleum floor, Viper spat, attempting to keep his swagger intact. He slurred his words as he said, "No way, you're real cops." The booze had made him even more aggressive, despite his precarious situation. As the first responding officer, James Mackenzie had worked with Kate and Sarah before and recognized them from their past collaborative operations. With an air of professionalism belying a small smile, he welcomed Detectives Foster and Thompson. "I see your drive home got interesting." Viper's face turned pale as he came to terms with how drastically he and his men had erred. "Got a concealed weapon here," announced Officer Lisa Martinez as she patted down Viper. She carefully removed a .45 caliber handgun from his vest, the source of the suspicious bulge both detectives had noticed earlier. "Serial number's been filed off and I'm betting he doesn't have a permit." As the local police officers carried out their investigation, additional proof accumulated. Within the bandana's jacket pockets, they discovered sachets of illicit substances. In the brass knuckles boot, they discovered an unregistered knife. A computer check indicated that all three guys were wanted on warrants from numerous jurisdictions. The incident, which began as gas station harassment, was quickly becoming a significant case. After the uniformed cops gave Margaret the signal, she came out of the rear room. As she recounted the events, her voice remained unfaltering despite the little tremor in her fingers. "Those two officers saved me," she said, pointing to Sarah and Kate. "They remained completely composed and shielded me from the men when they became aggressive. In my 15 years of working this shift, I've never been so terrified." Sarah assisted the other officers in gathering evidence, while Kate stood by the counter, writing her preliminary report. Especially helpful would be the footage from the security cameras. It had recorded the whole incident, beginning with the harassment and ending with the arrest. As the police presence increased and the lights flashed, the store windows revealed a small crowd assembling in the parking lot. Officer Mackenzie was getting ready to lead Viper to a patrol car when Viper snarked at Kate, saying, "You got lucky. If they had known you were cops, they would have had," with a severe tone. Sarah interrupted him. Outside, the elderly man who had departed earlier returned to provide his statement to another officer. "I knew something bad was about to happen," he said, leaning on his cane. "And I'm betting those modified bikes outside have some interesting stories to tell. The presence of that illegal gun suggests that you weren't planning anything good tonight." I had never witnessed anything like it before, the men's behavior and the two women's expert handling of the situation. After being contacted over the event, Margaret's boss showed there. Turning to Kate and Sarah, he expressed his gratitude after examining the security tape. "Thank God you two stopped here tonight," he said, shaking his head. "Margaret's been dealing with harassment from sketchy customers for years, but nothing like this. We're installing better security first thing tomorrow." As the bikers were loaded into separate patrol cars, Kate noticed their motorcycles had out-of-state plates from 5 different states. A quick check revealed that all 3 bikes were stolen, adding more charges to their growing list of crimes. The VIN numbers had been professionally altered, suggesting a sophisticated criminal operation. "Just wanted to pick up some snacks and gas," Sarah told Kate, who was finally able to relax. 3 arrests on the way home from training. Not what I was expecting. Good thing we just had that tactical refresher, Kate replied, finishing her report. The Academy's going to love this security footage for their training programs. The gas station slowly returned to normal as the patrol cars departed one by one, each carrying a subdued biker, who had learned a hard lesson about judging people by appearances. Officer Mackenzie approached the 2 detectives one last time. "The captain's going to be interested in this tomorrow," he said in a tone of respect. "You 2 did an excellent job with this. Strict adherence to protocol, leaving no casualties." What they didn't know at the time was that this was only the start. Their findings that night would eventually lead to a far larger criminal organization that had been threatening small businesses along the East Coast. At Wheeler's Gas and Go, the only thing that mattered as midnight drew near was the fact that another peaceful night shift could go on without a hitch, all because 2 detectives had just pulled up for gas. The booking procedure was underway at the Richmond Police Department once again. The 3 motorcyclists, who had previously pretended to be strong guys, sat in separate prison cells. Frank Viper Bradbury, whose real name was Viper, had a long criminal record spanning 3 decades. Detective Kate Foster observed from the observation glass while Officer Martinez interviewed him. "Now, while I review my notes, let me clarify," Martinez stated. "So, you 3 decided to invade Virginia on stolen motorbikes, armed with illicit substances and narcotics, all in an effort to cause trouble at the gas stations." Her tone made it clear how foolish their plan sounded in the harsh fluorescent light of the interview room. In the cell next door, Brass Knuckles, whose real name was Tommy Knuckles Davidson, couldn't stop talking. Fear had loosened his tongue and he was spilling information about other crimes their group had committed across 4 states. Sarah stood at the evidence booking desk, carefully logging everything they'd found. 3 illegal firearms, various drugs, stolen credit cards, and fake IDs. Each item added more charges to their case. "You are going to be amazed," Officer Mackenzie said, moving quickly towards Kate holding a piece of paper. "These individuals' complete background checks have just been received. They are associated with the Crimson Serpents, a greater group. All along the East Coast, they've been targeting small companies, with a particular focus on the older workers who are left alone at night." Kate's pupils contracted as she took all of this in. "So that's what they were planning at Wheeler's," she said thoughtfully. Margaret wasn't just a random target. She thought about the elderly cashier and felt even more relieved that they'd stopped at that particular gas station at that exact time. The police station buzzed with activity as more information about the bikers came to light. Bandana, whose real name was Steve Razor Peters, had started crying in his cell, begging to make a deal in exchange for information about their organization's leadership. Captain David Walsh called Kate and Sarah into his office. The gruff but fair captain had been reviewing the gas station security footage on his computer screen. "Outstanding detectives," he said, putting the video on hold. "The absence of you 2 could have resulted in disastrous consequences. However, the fact that the FBI has recently contacted is more intriguing to me than anything else you found." For months, they had followed the trail of the Crimson Serpents. The elderly employees of convenience stores, petrol stations, and other small businesses have apparently been the targets of a series of brutal robberies committed by this group. More officers were seen collecting evidence and taking statements through the captain's office window. Margaret, who had been far more assured earlier that evening, had come to properly lodge her complaint. Seeing Kate and Sarah brought a pleasant grin to her face. As Officer Martinez passed by carrying additional evidence bags, Margaret spoke up, her voice now stronger than before. "I can't thank you enough, Greasy. I was so scared, but the way you 2 handled everything, it was amazing, like watching professionals in action." Although her hands still showed slight bruising from where the brass knuckles had grabbed her, her spirit remained unbreakable. "Among our top investigators, you'll find these 2. The night shift is in full swing now, and news of the gas station incident has spread throughout the department. Other officers stopped by to congratulate Kate and Sarah on their quick thinking and professional handling of the situation. The training department had already requested copies of the security footage, saying it was a perfect example of how to handle an escalating situation with minimal force. Captain Walsh announced, "The FBI wants to coordinate with us on this case." As he came out of his office with fresh coffee for everyone, the news went around the department. "They may be able to bring down their entire operation thanks to your arrest tonight. They've stolen over $300,000 in their raids, but the real damage has been the trauma to their victims. Some of these elderly workers were seriously injured and many quit their jobs out of fear." Sarah reviewed the case files, her eyes widening at the details. The victims, who were mostly elderly workers targeted during night shifts, included hundreds of people. Margaret spoke up from where she was giving her statement. "I almost quit myself many times," she admitted. "Seeing how you two dealt with those men gives me hope, because the nights can be dangerous, especially when troublemakers come in. Maybe things can change." As the night progressed, the evidence against the Crimson Serpents continued to mount. What had started as a simple gas station stop had turned into something much bigger, a chance to bring justice to countless victims who had suffered in silence. But for Kate and Sarah, it was just another example of why they'd chosen this profession, to protect those who needed it most, one shift at a time. The following morning, the story of the gas station incident spread quickly through Virginia law enforcement circles. Kate and Sarah arrived at their desks to find their email inboxes full of messages from other departments and even the FBI. Special Agent Thomas Anderson from the FBI's Elderly Crimes Task Force walked into the precinct around 9 a.m., carrying a thick file folder under his arm. "Detective Thompson and Foster," he said, looking around the room. Agent Anderson spread out photos and documents across the table in the conference room. "The Crimson Serpents aren't just any criminal gang. We need to talk about the 3 motorcyclists you caught last night. They have been methodically going for retirees in 5 different states. They target elderly people, and they do it all by themselves at night," Kate explained as she leaned down to study a map of the group's criminal activities marked with red dots. As Agent Anderson went on to explain, the criminals always follow the same pattern. First, they send out scouts to find people who are easy prey, like elderly night shift workers. Then, they rob the place later on, but not before terrorizing their victims and making them feel powerless and afraid. Meanwhile, the 3 bikers were having a rough morning in the holding cells. After coming to terms with how drastically he had erred, Frank Viper Bradbury sat there with his hands over his head. The lengthy list of charges against him was just relayed to him by his lawyer. In another interview room, Tommy Knuckles Davidson was indeed speaking. "I'll tell you everything," he said nervously to the federal prosecutor about the Crimson Serpents, their leaders, and every job they had ever pulled. "Federal charges, multiple state charges, weapons violations, and they have you on video with clear evidence of intent." Viper's face turned pale as he realized the gravity of his situation. "Just please consider a lighter sentence." Steve Razor Peters wasn't doing any better. The tough guy who had terrorized Margaret at the counter now sat crying in his cell, begging to call his mother. The night shift swagger had completely evaporated in the harsh light of day. Back upstairs, Margaret arrived at the station to identify her attackers for the official record. She looked different today, confident, holding her head high. Several officers had already submitted commendations for her bravery in handling the situation. "The security footage is incredible," Margaret told Sarah and Kate, with a renewed sense of determination. "My grandkids are in awe of your courage. You made those criminals look like greenhorns." With a smile, she continued, "My boss isn't just putting in more security cameras. He's also hiring a guard for the night shifts, and other stations in the neighborhood are following suit." As lunchtime approached, a crowd of reporters gathered outside the police station. It had been featured in the morning news. In their spare time, detectives from a rural station apprehended 3 members of an infamous gang. While applauding Sarah and Kate for their professionalism, Captain Walsh oversaw the press conference, ensuring that Margaret's privacy was protected. You shouldn't judge people by their appearance. Those criminals thought they found easy targets. This case shows that crime doesn't pay, the captain told the cameras. Kate shook her head and said, "We just stopped for gas." Sarah then added, "We watched the press conference on TV, slightly embarrassed by all the attention." Kate and Sarah were inside watching the press conference. "We followed standard procedure, as any officer would." "Maybe," Agent Anderson countered, "but you executed it flawlessly." By afternoon, the Crimson Serpent's leadership was growing increasingly anxious. 3 states' worth of police had conducted raids based on information gleaned from the arrested bikers. Their entire operation was unraveling because 3 of their members had harassed the wrong women at a gas station. "I suppose they learned a costly lesson," Sarah remarked as she completed another report. "Don't judge a book by its cover, and definitely don't harass older people at gas stations." Kate added with a slight smile, "You never know who might be carrying a badge." However, both detectives knew their work was far from done. A week after the incident at the gas station, the impact of that night continued to ripple through the criminal justice system. The case was expanding at an alarming rate, and other elderly workers were reportedly still facing similar threats. However, everything changed after a fateful stop at Wheeler's Gas and Go. At their preliminary hearing before Judge Eleanor Matthews, Frank, Viper, Bradbury, and his 2 companions, removed from their leather vests and tough guy attitudes, were watched by Kate and Sarah in a federal courthouse. Instead, they appeared diminutive and vanquished in the expansive courtroom while clad in orange jumpsuits and shackles. The judge was presented with a lengthy list of charges by federal prosecutor Andrea Rodriguez. "Your Honor, the defendants are charged with multiple federal crimes across 5 states, she announced with conviction in her voice. Including armed robbery, weapons trafficking, drug possession, elderly abuse, and participating in organized crime as members of the Crimson Serpent's gang." Margaret sat with her family in the gallery, watching the proceedings. She had become something of a local hero after the incident, speaking to other elderly gas station workers about safety and awareness. Several other victims from previous attacks by the Crimson Serpent's gang had come forward after seeing the news, strengthening the case against the gang. "The prosecution's case is being advanced, according to the defendant's statements," Rodriguez said. The Crimson Serpent's organization has had 15 further members apprehended by law police. The 3 motorcyclists were stared down by Judge Matthews, a severe-faced woman with silver hair. She had previously discovered stolen items valued at over $750,000 and had evidence of a systematic targeting of senior workers all along the East Coast. "Dear gentlemen, you have made the decision to inflict fear upon innocent retirees. Thinking they were easy targets," she said firmly. "Instead, you happen to harass 2 highly trained police detectives. Sometimes justice has a sense of crimsony." Outside the courtroom, Agent Anderson shared updates with Kate and Sarah about the broader investigation. "The Crimson Serpents are imploding," he explained, showing them photos of recent arrests. "Everyone's turning on each other trying to make deals, all because you 2 stopped for gas that night." Back at the Richmond Police Department, Captain Walsh had more good news. The state legislature is launching a new safety program for elderly night shift workers, he told them. "They're using your gas station incident as a wake-up call. Every store will get panic buttons, better lighting, and enhance." Observing Kate and Sarah's composed professionalism and impeccable timing, new recruits learned how to manage stressful situations. The academy instructor made sure his students understood how the policemen were calm and collected throughout the ordeal, how they kept the public safe, and how they worked in perfect harmony with the responding police. After Sarah and Kate left, they went to Wheeler's Gas and Go. Margaret greeted them with a bright smile from behind the counter, where a fresh panic button had been installed. The establishment looked different now. New security cameras, improved lighting, and a sign advertising 24-hour security monitoring. "The amount of change is unbelievable," Margaret exclaimed. Sarah observed Margaret's newfound self-assurance as she spoke to the older woman, reassuring her, "You were brave that night." Margaret went on to explain that 3 nearby stations had hired security guards, her boss had promoted her to night shift supervisor, and she was even teaching self-defense classes to other elderly workers. Margaret pointed to a small frame on the wall that contained a newspaper article about the incident. While they were leaving the gas station, a number of customers recognized them from the news. An old woman approached them timidly, but she kept her cool and did everything perfectly. "You should be an encouragement to others who are frightened to work night shifts." She thanked you, saying, "I've worked nights at a convenience store for 20 years. Your story inspired us to demand better security. You showed us that we don't have to accept harassment just because we're older." Kate checked her phone and saw a message from Agent Anderson. 2 more Crimson Serpents leaders were just arrested in Maryland. Their entire operation was crumbling because 3 of their members had mistakenly targeted the wrong gas station. As they made their way back to the station, Kate remarked, "It's amazing how one small decision can have such big consequences." She continued, "If we had stopped for gas anywhere else that night, those guys would still be out there terrorizing elderly workers. Rather than that, they are now facing federal charges," Sarah noted. "Their gang is destroyed, and stores are finally getting better security for their elderly employees. Sometimes the best kind of justice is the kind that helps prevent future crimes." The sun was setting over Richmond as they drove, painting the sky in orange and purple, just like it had been on that fateful night, when 3 bikers learned the hard way not to judge people by appearances, and not to underestimate elderly workers, or the people who protect them. 3 months after the gas station incident, Kate and Sarah stood before a large crowd at the Virginia Law Enforcement's annual award ceremony. Governor Helen Martinez approached the podium, holding 2 Valor Commendation medals. "Tonight we honor Detectives Kate Foster and Sarah Thompson." In the audience, Margaret sat with her family, proudly wearing her new name badge as the Regional Night Shift Safety Coordinator for a gas station chain. Agent Anderson, who had driven down from Washington specifically for the ceremony, sat next to her. Several rows behind them were other elderly workers who had survived attacks by the Crimson Serpents and were finally seeing justice served. "The Crimson Serpents gang is now completely disbanded," the governor continued. "Their actions not only protected a vulnerable citizen, but led to the dismantling of one of the most dangerous criminal organizations targeting elderly workers across the Southeast." Griffith, 2018. As a result of the leads led by those first arrests, 42 gang members from 6 different states have been apprehended by the police. "We've recovered stolen property worth over $1.2 million, and more importantly, our elderly workers no longer have to live in fear." Background video from that night's security footage, which is now famous in law enforcement training programs, played as Kate and Sarah received their medals. As onlookers observed, the 2 detectives acted with the utmost professionalism, setting a high standard for other police officers to follow. Viper Frank. Sending their sentences a week prior, Bradbury and his 2 colleagues were let go. There had been no mercy from Judge Matthews. 25 years for Bradbury, 20 for Davidson, and 10 for Peters. They wouldn't be a threat to anyone for a long time, but their testimony against other gang members had spared them life sentences. Following the ceremony, Margaret approached the investigators to share some thrilling news. Convincingly titled Night Shift Warriors, she proudly announced the launch of her new national initiative. Agent Anderson provided updates regarding the case's broader impact, saying, "We're teaching elderly workers self-defense, safety awareness, and most importantly, that age doesn't make us weak or vulnerable." The events of that night inspired Anderson to want to assist safeguard others like herself. "The number of crimes committed against senior workers has decreased by 70% in the region," he said. "Night shift workers are subject to new safety regulations that are being enforced by every state. You've initiated a genuine catalyst for transformation." The local press had coined the term, the Margaret Effect, to describe how a single incident of unsuccessful harassment had led to extensive enhancements in workplace safety. Security systems were beefed up, panic buttons became standard issue, and training for employees was rethought to incorporate techniques for protecting oneself and one's surroundings tailored to the unique needs of older employees. "Do you remember how terrified I was that night?" Margaret inquired, her eyes wandering to her new position badge. "Now I teach other older employees how to deal with stressful situations. We even incorporate footage from the security camera into our safety training, with my permission, of course." Margaret grinned warmly at the investigators. "My grandchildren say I'm their superhero now." The story of Kate and Sarah had taken root outside the realm of law enforcement. They served as a model for self-defense workshops for seniors around the nation, instilling in their students a sense of confidence and awareness. Physical intimidation had little power in this situation, and remaining calm under pressure had proven that age was nothing more than a number. One more bit of news came from Captain Walsh as he approached them. "You two are being asked to speak at the National Council on Aging's annual conference," he announced. "It's hard to believe it all started because we needed gas," Sarah said, looking at her commendation medal. "They're calling your gas station incident a perfect example of how society can better protect its elderly workers. You've changed the conversation about night shift safety." Later that evening, Kate and Sarah drove past Wheeler's Gas and Go, which had undergone a complete transformation. Security cameras, bright lights, and a new sign advertising safe space for night shift workers, part of the Night Shift Warriors network, had transformed the place. Plus, the three motorcyclists made some fairly naive assumptions about the older employees. "And about two women at a gas station," Kate smiled and continued, "who thought about those three men now sitting in federal prison, learning the hard way that you can't judge people by their age or appearance. Their attempt to harass an elderly worker had cost them their freedom, destroyed their criminal organization, and sparked positive changes that will protect countless others." A new group of senior citizens was starting their shift at petrol stations around Virginia as they drove away. They were able to work with assurance and self-assurance since the Margaret effect had shown that society valued its most seasoned employees. Stories about three bikers who messed with the wrong women at a gas station would be passed down through the generations, serving as a constant reminder that resilience sometimes wears a silver-haired bun and can appear in the most unexpected places. "I still can't believe how much has changed," Margaret remarked, speaking to a packed conference room at the National Senior Safety Summit in Washington, D.C., 6 months after the event. Her silver hair was carefully styled, and she wore a jacket with a Night Shift Warriors badge on the lapel. Agent Anderson and officials from senior advocacy groups across the country sat behind her on the stage, while Kate and Sarah sat on each side of her. "6 months ago, I was just another scared old worker on the night shift," Margaret said, her voice commanding. "Two courageous investigators didn't only save my life, they also changed the way the United States safeguards its aging workforce, and I'm here to tell you all about it." Law enforcement officers, company owners, and senior rights advocates were all paying close attention to what she had to say. The changes had been dramatic and far-reaching, requiring increased security measures and safety training for senior personnel working night shifts, a policy that 20 states have since enacted, was dubbed Margaret's Law. There was a total reorganization of the night shift security procedures as a result of the Crimson Serpent case, which had revealed a statewide pattern of criminals, particularly targeting senior workers, and Frank Viper Bradbury had become an unusual advocate for change in the federal prison. In an appearance with 60 Minutes, he startled the nation by speaking from within a prison. "We believed they were weak, easy victims," he confessed, "and so we targeted elderly workers. I now spend my time writing letters to elderly victims, apologizing for what our gang did." Back in Richmond, Wheeler's Gas and Go had become a model for the new safety standards. "That night at Wheeler's taught me how wrong we were." Margaret showed a group of business owners the station's security features, while a documentary team recorded the event. "Every employee is equipped with a panic button," she clarified, revealing the gadget concealed as an ordinary key fob. "Automatic locks that can be remotely activated, direct lines to local police, and cameras powered by AI that can identify hostile behavior are all part of our service. From her desk, Sarah watched as the evening news demonstrated that similar transformations were taking place across the nation, reflecting the inspiration that the station's makeover had given to others. The newscaster said, "Another gas station joins the growing night shift warriors network in Chicago tonight, making it the 1,000th location to adopt these enhanced safety measures for elderly workers." Agent Anderson texted Kate, interrupting her day. "You won't believe these numbers. There has been an 85% decrease in crimes committed against workers aged 65 and up statewide. March will see 7 additional states ratifying Margaret's bill. The police school built a whole course on the gas station event, so it was bigger than they thought. Officers learned how to better safeguard senior workers and react to threats against them from the Margaret protocols, as they were now known. Law enforcement authorities from all over the globe had watched the security tape from that night. According to Margaret, it's not merely about physical security, she told the conference goers. It's about changing how society views elderly workers. We are not defenseless victims, rather, we are seasoned experts who must be treated with dignity and safety. As she raised her Night Shift Warriors Coordinator badge, the crowd erupted in cheers. Sarah and Kate were the featured subjects of the cover story of AARP magazine. The Night That Changed Everything. The story described how the acts of 2 detectives and a courageous cashier revolutionized elder worker safety and started a nationwide movement. More unexpected news arrived when Captain Walsh summoned them to his office. He made the announcement after learning that the UN is interested in our program to serve as an example for protecting older workers around the world. They're claiming it's the biggest step forward in protecting the elderly in decades. Those who had been attacked by the Crimson Serpent before discovered they had become stronger. In order to aid geriatric employees in overcoming trauma and regaining self-confidence, Margaret established a support group, which has since expanded to 40 states. Because that night proved to us that strength is not defined by age, one member told a local television station, we now refer to ourselves as the Silver Lions. Police training has also been altered as a result of the occurrence. There are now special courses on protecting elderly workers, recognizing age-based targeting, and creating better relationships with senior individuals in their communities. This is happening nationwide among departments. "Sarah, take a look at this," Kate signaled to Sarah's phone. Another Florida motorcycle gang was recently apprehended, but this time it wasn't by the police, rather, it was an old gas station attendant who had seen the gang's patterns of behavior in Margaret's training program and reported them to the authorities in time to prevent a crime. Through a transition from victim to vigilant, Sarah smiled and responded. "That's what I call progress." At the end of her keynote address, Margaret displayed the framed article that had been taken the night of the event. With an emotional voice, she remarked, "This isn't just about what happened at one gas station." And she meant it. Workers' dignity, safety, and well-being should be prioritized, and this is an opportunity to demonstrate that to the world. It took 2 courageous detectives who pulled over for gas that night, but now we have it. As she spoke softly from a podium inside Richmond's recently dedicated Margaret Wilson Center for Elder Worker Protection, Margaret mentioned the past decade. That tragic night at Wheeler's Gas and Go happened 10 years ago. Her eyes still gleamed with the same resolve that had helped revolutionize worker safety for America's aged, but her hair had turned a little whiter. The center, an expansive and contemporary building, acted as a training headquarters for the Night Shift Warriors program and a national resource for the protection of elderly workers. Displayed on the walls were photographs, newspaper articles about the initial event, Margaret's testimony before Congress, and a striking image of Kate and Sarah accepting the Presidential Medal of Freedom for their contribution in igniting a national movement for change. 10 years ago, I was just a scared night shift worker, Margaret added, speaking to the audience at the center's grand opening. It gives me great pleasure to announce that our safety initiatives have successfully graduated more than 50,000 older workers. 8 nations have embraced our standards, and we have chapters in every one of the 50 states. The first row was occupied by Kate and Sarah, who are now prominent officers in the FBI's Elderly Protection Division. Based on the data, it was clear that their chance meeting at the gas station had set them on an unexpected career path, where they now specialize in crimes committed against senior workers and assist in the development of protection programs on a national level. Since Margaret's law went into effect, there has been a 92% decrease in crimes committed against senior workers. There were more than 20,000 sites participating in the Night Shift Warriors Network at this point. The system, which had its humble beginnings as a security measure at gas stations, has grown into an extensive national safety net. Unexpectedly, Frank's Viper Bradbury had become a change agent while viewing the ceremony on television in the prison library. Dozens of formerly incarcerated gang members were able to turn their lives around through his Bikers for Elder Rights initiative. His widely published memoirs recount how that fateful night altered more than just his liberty. My perspective on aging, resilience, and fairness has shifted. A modest museum chronicling the incident that began a movement is attached to Wheeler's Gas and Go, which has been listed as a National Historic Landmark. Tour groups frequently pause to see the original site, and Margaret frequently spoke to the visiting groups about the significance of protecting elderly workers. According to Margaret, her grandchildren recently wanted to know if she was terrified that night. No more worry for senior workers. Thanks to 2 courageous detectives and the thousands of committed individuals here, the influence had gone much beyond petrol stations. A nationwide support system, mandatory safety training, and improved protection legislation for the elderly have all been implemented. A single event could change how society treats vulnerable populations, and the Margaret effect had become a prime illustration of this. Sarah got to her feet to offer her viewpoint. "We assumed we were just pulling over for gas," she smiled at Kate and said. "The true hero isn't us, rather, we were instrumental in sparking a revolution on the protection of older workers." The person who transformed her fear into a catalyst for positive change is Margaret and every single senior worker who refused to be a victim and who stepped up and said, "We deserve more." They're the ones who transformed this incident into a movement, Kate continued. At the end of the ceremony, a new program called the Margaret Wilson Scholarship Fund was unveiled. This program aims to help older workers who are looking for second careers in security and safety coordination get the education and training they need. The first class of 50 students, all over 60 years old, matched the uniforms of the Night Shift Warriors. Margaret took one more glance at the center carrying her name as the sun set over Richmond, casting the same orange glow that had illuminated that terrible night a decade before. Standing tall and proud, the old woman who had shivered behind a gas station counter now represented courage and growth. She reassured an older workforce beginning their night shift that aging isn't a weakness. It's a source of wisdom and strength. She also mentioned that 2 detectives who pulled over for gas a decade ago had made it so that the world now gets it. As the sun set, the emblem of the Night Shift Warriors, a silver lion standing proud, took in its final rays. The story of 3 bikers who messed with the wrong women at a gas station had become more than just a tale of justice served, but now older workers across the country are beginning their shifts with confidence, protected by laws, technology, and a network of support. Protecting our most seasoned employees was not only the right thing to do, but absolutely necessary, and it had become a symbol of how society could change, when it acknowledged that strength comes in all ages. As Margaret secured the facility for the night, a new police recruit inquired as to whether or not Margaret ever felt remorse for what transpired that evening. Grasping the pin that belonged to her Night Shift Warrior, she grinned. "The most important thing is to fight for what's right, to protect each other, and to never let anyone tell you that your age defines your worth. That night taught us all that, regardless of our age, we should never regret anything." In the midst of the waning light, another elderly worker began their night shift, no longer terrified, thanks to 2 detectives who paused for gas and 1 courageous woman who refused to let fear win.
Disclaimer. This channel stands against all forms of intolerance, discrimination, racism, and violations of human rights. The stories shared here are original creations, developed to encourage reflection, understanding, and constructive dialogue. All content is produced with a commitment to respecting diversity and honoring human dignity.